Hello, it is time to do your Project 2 critiques, and this critique will be for Hannah, Kirsten, and Natalie. And we'll start here with Hannah. And right away, I like the big, bold red texture. I like the texture in that background too, and how that really helps push forward the grayscale visual elements, which are kind of in the center and lower in the composition. And the book's coming forward. In your sketches, I had a difficult time telling what this figure was, but it certainly works here. Um, it's obviously a student, their head on the desk or something like that. Then we have time to choose what is more important: the cost of education, the value of education. Comment about me asking some questions. So I like that structure as it pushes it forward, and then we get this sense of, like hopelessness or frustration with the figure with their head down on the desk. Little piles of cash here are fairly subtle, and they kind of merge within this stuff, and I really have to get a closer look to see what they are. I'm not sure if I like that or not. Sometimes I like the subtlety where we have to, draw the viewer in, and I think there's enough to draw the viewer in. I do wonder if there was a slight green cast to it. I wouldn't want to make it really saturated green, but just a slight greenness to it, if that would be good or if it would be distracting. Might play off the red nicely, complementary and all, but so I'm not sure about that. But overall I like the structure. I also like that when I get here, I start to see a little bit of text in the background here. Chart 5, the cost of college tuition has increased faster than the family income over the past decade. And that's, I think, what we're finding overall. I was just reading an article about cost of living and apartments. It takes like 3 part-time jobs at minimum wage to afford rent in the average place. That is just insane. There's the wages are not keeping up with inflation, and education is part of that. And what are our values, and where are we putting our money, and what are we getting for it? And this question, or this poster, I think enters into that question. I would like to see just clean it up a little bit. A little distracted here. I think you just need to crop it a little more, or get a little slightly better photograph of it. The poster is sort of this, at this point, almost sort of an archaic thing. Though you do see posters around, but they're not quite as popular, simply because what we see, digital, we see the ads, the pop-up ads, and banner ads, and that sort of stuff. And all those are really posters. They're just in a different format and smaller, and we lose context and subtlety. And I don't know, if subtlety like that is as effective in that format. Anyways, though, this distracts me a little bit. I just want to cut it off, fill it with the rest of the background or whatever. But I think the poster is effective. And then we move on to this poster. You change the text on the books, pretty much essentially the same composition. So you got a degree, finding the perfect job, pay off your debt, how to use your education. This one seems to ask less questions of me, and seems to have more presents me with things that I'll have to think about. And so the 2, I like this one better. It seems a little more deep in that sense, where questions are presented simply because of the juxtaposition of things. And here it's more informative. But all the visual structures stay the same, and I like how you swapped out the different text there, and I think that's effective. We still have a little bit of stuff to clean up here. It'd be better if we can crop that out. But overall the design is effective and interesting and engaging, and is working. And then I start looking at your written research, and you ask questions like, there must be a line somewhere between what is an appropriate amount of media coverage and what is too much or too little. You also ask, which website should I browse? Even then, odds are I'm not going to get the full story every single time. And those are very important questions in our day and age. And I think the biggest question you ask is, what is that appropriate amount of media coverage for an event? Because you're addressing like violence and how the coverage almost, gets excessive and then almost to the point of glorification. And, yeah, watching the news is almost all negative. There's a lot of research done on that where it's almost all negative. Very little of it is positive. And then what are we conditioning ourselves to? And it becomes such an interesting point because, I take Vietnam as an interesting example photographically, because most of the wars previous to that the United States was certainly involved in, were highly, the images were very much controlled by the government as to what people saw. World War I had rules like you couldn't show a dead American soldier, et cetera, et cetera. But Vietnam became the sort of Wild West of photography and sharing it, and we end up with a very split. We see the images of what is happening over there, how the populations are being affected, how the soldiers are being affected, and very visceral imagery. And the nation had a very visceral reaction and created this very strong split as supporting it because they saw the horrors of the war. So bringing it to light can be a good thing because war should be an absolute last resort. It is very horrific. At least the discussions I've had, the images that I've seen, discussions with soldiers, my uncle, etc., participated. Horrific. And it really ought to be this thing that we just flaunt about. But too much of it seems to desensitize us. So that's a good question you're asking. You also go on to say there are so many ways for outsiders to get involved with democracy without much effort, especially with the internet now. And that's exactly what we're dealing with. The social media is this double-edged sword. It can be good. We can participate. We can share. But it's so open that others can also easily share. And we don't always know who it is that we're hearing from. Who's paying for that ad or who's even making that post just because their name says X. Is that really them? It demands a lot of us to get to the truth, to get to a sort of reality and objectivity. And it's really challenging this day and age. That's what the whole, I honestly get somewhat confused sometimes in our political dialogue. We have the Russia. It seems pretty obvious that Russia has attempted to meddle in our elections. This should not be a partisan issue. This should be, we should all be very concerned about this, and we should all want to get to the bottom of it. And it all gets boiled down to such partisan BS. What is there any real America that's united? Are we even united on our morals at this point? It seems not. So many things to consider. You also have some very legitimate concerns at the end here. Now, I don't believe in free college necessarily, but tuition and fees that correlate with income of people would be much more feasible. The only way I'm working on my degree right now is because my school district helps pay for part of my tuition and fees. Yeah, I know education can be such a financial burden, and that's really changing in the past few years. I was on faculty senate here a few years ago, and they brought up a slide. The CFO was here, and she shared a slide that really kind of helped put it in context for me. We are moving away from supporting education and putting more of that burden on the population. Well, at the same time this wasn't part of the slide, but at the same time that population is proportionally paid less. If we look at historical salaries in the past 50 years, we're being paid less and asked to pay more for things like college. And but anyways, the slide was that at that time, which was probably 7 or 8 years ago, 10 years ago, so 18 years ago, the state paid roughly covered half the tuition costs for its citizens. And then in that time, it has gone down. It was less than 40% at that time. And it's probably even less at this time. So there's this belief that higher education in particular is, the burden is on the individual. It's not a cultural good as it was looked at, say 40, 50 years ago. So that certainly hits home here at the university and hits home for students. And it's a dialogue that I think should be public, but it's really not. You know, people are just kind of doing what they want. They put on a fancy, support education, but at the same time they say they support it, yet they take money away from it. All right, anyways, we'll move along there, and we'll look at Kirsten's. And you know, I really like the photograph when I saw it, and really like how you're utilizing it in this context. Again, money. Everything revolves around money, right? Americans owe over 1.48 trillion in student loan debt, and we're dealing with student loan debt. A college career does not guarantee a chandelier. You know, and I think that's an interesting thing is what's our expectation? And sometimes I think students figure like, oh, I got this degree and I should just plug into the job. And it doesn't work that way for most majors. It does, you know, if you're in education, art education, or any education, you know, you can, you know, teaching, there's a pipeline to those things. If you're engineering, perhaps a pipeline. Graphic design, you know, there's somewhat of a pipeline. But if you're a studio artist, it's not a job that you plug in directly from that. And sometimes that's the expectation. And that is also an interesting debate that we could have is what is the value of education? What is the purpose of education? Is it to get people jobs or to create educated citizenry so we can make better decisions collectively? La, 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 la. Whatever it is, I think education should give you the tools. There may not be this direct pipeline, but, you know, that's what I like to emphasize in art. It's creative thinking and critical thinking and problem solving. Those are valuable skills no matter what you want to do in this world or where you can plug yourself in. All right, but and here's your other poster, and now you're saying, does she need a chandelier in her bathroom? Tax the rich. So I really like how you know, and then you threw some money in the bathtub. I think that's nice too. Kind of emphasizing the fact that those who have even more, and we have this growing gap. Our severe poverty is growing in this country quicker than any time in probably the past 50, 60 years. You don't hear much about that. So, you know, I think this is a nice image, nice collage. I also really appreciate how you've taken, this is a very different issue than this one, you know. Now we're dealing with college debt, et cetera, and I like the ball and chain that you've created. And the empty space in the bathtub almost becomes, I don't know if it's just looking at the compare and contrast of the previous image where it's filled with money and now it has no money. It almost seems much more effective looking at them together in that context. I still think it would be good standalone. But, you know, you've taken this you know, student debt here. Here now we're dealing with a very different issue of taxation and wealth distribution. And, you know, just a few minor changes, text, little imagery, and we completely shift. So this image has a flexibility to it. And that's what I wanted to explore in this project is how do we manipulate, make things, alter them, and how much of it is visual, and how much of it is text, and how much of it is symbols that we utilize within our imagery. And you've effectively manipulated all those, so good job. Looking at your research, you talked a lot about Ferry and how he discusses his artwork as provocative and filled with social and political messages. Not only did he create the infamous Hope poster, but he also created artwork about war in Iraq. Famous artists and the abstracted Andre the Giant, Obey. Yes, the Obey meme sticker. Graffiti that was everywhere for a while. Yeah. So, yeah, what do we use this art for? You know, Ferry certainly is very political in his use with his creative visual work. Not everyone has to be, but it is quite often connected. And that's the whole theory of visual culture, is that it's not just in isolation. Even if it's a pretty painting, there's a connection to that, to culture, and to its values, and to its beliefs, and to its desires and hopes. You go on here and you talk about propaganda, posters, and at the end of that paragraph you say, we know instantly what they are thinking about each topic, and that can influence our opinion daily on important matters or unimportant matters too. And here you're talking about Twitter and people using it, and our president, and other people's opinions whom we feel matter. We get this instant insight to how they feel, and I think that's this positive of social media. You know, it doesn't have to go through this filter of media. It can come directly to us, and we get this sort of unfiltered insight, and I think that's really valuable. We also have some negative aspects of it we need to consider, but that is definitely a positive, even if we disagree with what they say. Anyways, you also go on to say, if I posted my posters I created for class in my personal social media, people would assume through the imagery that these were my stances and these political issues, and that you are knowledgeable about them and ready to discuss them at length. Yeah, I mean, that's how we create that identity. What we post sort of, gives people insight as to who we are, what we believe, or at least that's the idea. We could totally create these sites that are fake, and happens all the time. People trying to affect our politics, creating fake sites, fake names, putting fake information up there, and trying to influence it, and it seems fairly successful. So, we've got to be careful about what we're sharing, how we're sharing it, who we're sharing it, and who we're sharing it with. And if that's how we want to be. And that's a lot to consider, and that's becomes challenging. All right, well, let's move along here, and let's take a look at Natalie's. I want to start with the other one first. Yes. And here we have, this picture on the beach. And we get the Tinder, and, creating this little poster. It seems very kind of, I don't know, it feels very informal to me when I look at this, like something, somebody might just post up there. It doesn't, it says Tinder, match, chat, and meet new people, but it doesn't feel like a professional advertisement for Tinder. It feels like something that, it's teenager, somebody might create in there and propose or whatever. Okay, so, this has a very informal feel to it. And I want to push and pull things. I feel like this could be explored a lot more. I'm not sure, I get the issue of, Tinder, and maybe it's like a little love meme poster that you might create for a significant other. Maybe that's what that's supposed to relate. I've never actually been on Tinder or looked at it, so just have a vague awareness of it. So maybe I could be missing out on some of the finer, nuanced elements of it. But anyways, I did like how you dealt with this message here. I thought this was really quite clever. And Tinder, match, chat, and meet new people is still there, still in the same places, etc. I like the grayscale though, and then the red and the oranges and the pinks. They really push forward on that and emphasize that. What I really like about this though is how you deal with, as you talked about in your research paper, human trafficking. And, how social media and tools like that can be used to lure people and then end up in this world, this crazy, scary world of human trafficking, which historically known as slavery. I almost think maybe we should be using that word slave again. The human trafficking almost seems so mundane and really doesn't hit home. And I'm not sure, I think, I think we ought to call it what it is, sexual slavery, labor slavery, that, so Tinder can be used, but then on your research paper, you also talk about, how it also happens in real time and, people being abducted from grocery stores or Uber or whatever it is. But Uber also, of course, connects to our social media because they have sort of this social media aspect in their phone and doing that. But I really like the cleverness that you engaged with here with the missing people, and you cut out those people, and then you put this missing poster ad in place of them. And it really kind of hits. I almost want to emphasize a little bit more. I don't know if there's a slight color shift, like maybe we could take this orange here and just put a fairly low saturation of it on those outlines. So I want to emphasize the outline, as people, because you cut them out from the people in the previous image. So I like that idea that I get this human outline, and then there's this guy in there, and then the missing poster, and it really, challenges that and makes me think about the potential negative aspects of that social media, Tinder, meetup, hookup sites. And I really appreciate that. So I mean, in your research, you definitely talk about that. And you quote Mirzoff, where he says that, for the most part, slavery itself was invisible in Western eyes, or at least kept as far out of sight as possible, rendering slave economies peculiarly vulnerable to visual propaganda, which is a thing I really want to think about here, because it wasn't in the eye, it made it really vulnerable to visual propaganda. Had it been more visually overt, would there have been more outrage about it? Probably, I would hope. But then this seems to make the sense that because it wasn't very visual, that it really became susceptible to propaganda. I don't know, I didn't work that out. No, I like how you pulled out that quote to pull it in there. One thing I think you could do better is within your research is drawing from more resources. You're quoting Mirzoff, but was there anything else that I had you read or look at that kind of informed you or made you think about things? I want to see that in your next research paper, though the next one's going to be a little less formal in a sense and more of an artist statement. But show to me that you're doing more than just reading the text books. And I think that'll be important. Gives me a sense of what you're reading and thinking about and how engaged you are with the subject. Okay, anyways, love this poster. Not sure about the other one. All right, I'm going to leave it there.